It's the women that often don't get into a lot of political frays, and they don't get into a lot of these discussions. Because I'm Queen Quet and I'm the chiefess and head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation, I am often the one who my community sends forward into these arenas to negotiate these things, to educate the politicians and those who then send down the mandates. But you know what I love better? Is when I can bring them to the island. And so since y'all are too far south for us to get you onto one of our sea islands, Sister Sharon has brought a little taste of those islands to you, the way she found it, when she came to St. Helena Island and the Sea Islands and started doing this research. We didn't know she was studying us at the time. We thought she was there to enjoy the seafood festival with us. But she was. And so definitely she's going to share with you now her view from the outside in of the role of the Gullah Geechee Ooman and how we the cow on culture. So I give to you Dr. Sharon Fuller of UC Berkeley.
Good morning. And thank you. I'm not a doctor yet. I'm working on it. So
I thought she got it now.
I'm working on it. And you know that's so true. What Queen, just about everything that she said is true about when you're there. You no longer are a researcher. You just become a part of the community, and that's how I found myself. I was really learning about the cast knitting, learning about the different traditions, and really being immersed in the culture. And that's the best way that I was able to conduct my research. So, and continue to conduct my research. So I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Berkeley. I study coastal fishing communities, in particular St. Helena and the Gullah Geechee culture. So what I want to do today is give you just a brief overview of some of the traditions that I've observed in the last year, and point out some of the challenges, and maybe discuss a little bit. We're going to have time left over where we can talk about maybe next steps that we can all do together, because the main thing is to really look at how we can collaborate, and that's often missing when you talk about policy and when you talk about management strategies. It's all done in offices without really integrating what needs to be done with the community. So that's going to be an element of the talk too. So let's see. So first I wanted to talk about, I don't know how close I need to be to this mic. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Just a day or something.
That would be the easiest thing to do. Okay, that works. So we're going to talk about sort of the connection to the land and how Gullah Geechee relate to the land, because the identity is bound to that geographical location that Queen Quet talked about. And so that is really what drives the claim to indigeneity, is because this culture was produced and constituted in that space. That's the difference. And that's why it's very important that the relationship of the linkages in the land are brought to the forefront. And so the other element is the resources that are out there. They are a resource that is not possessed. It is available. There's an unofficial entitlement to the water resources and to the land resources, and that it doesn't need to be dictated or restricted by the Department of Natural Resources, although it is. But that is the official language. That's not what's happening on the ground. There's a different way that people interact with the resources in their area that is somewhat isolated, or very much isolated on the barrier islands. Some of the islands, like the Fusky Island, still does not have access by a bridge. So the residents there are able to act pretty independently and autonomously in those environments because they don't have a lot of interaction with the mainlands. And so that's sort of the characteristic of the sea islands, is that there isn't a lot of inflow that comes in there. And the other thing is it's very bountiful, the resources. So you have a lot of crab, shrimp, seafoods that are used on a daily basis. And the system goes around the tide. So at low tides, you'll see people go out and get certain species out of the creeks and the marshes. So at low tides, you may see women that come out and actually go out and crab at low tide. Or you'll see at high tide, another group of people are coming out and fishing for a particular species. So the tides really dictate sort of the rhythm of the island, and it's done on a daily basis. And so the last thing I wanted to say was on this one was reciprocity. It's really looking at within this community that it's looked at as a community as a whole of how we can be a community together. It's not this individual notion that I need to better myself and I need to look out for myself. It's how we are going to share the resources in this space and how we continue to move forward as this community. And when I was doing some of my participatory observations, which sounds good, but it just doesn't happen because people always pulled me in and I would try to just kind of sit and watch. I would immediately be pulled into fishing or cast netting or
Serving food.
Serving, oh right, serving food. Never able to just kind of sit back and observe and take notes. That just doesn't happen. Is that Whitney? Hey, welcome. Another Californian. And so I was out there looking at, talking to some of the guys on the dock, and he was saying, you know, we really don't have this sense of homelessness here because food is everywhere. You can get it in the creeks. You can get it in the bays. And all you just do is go out there and get it. You don't have to necessarily have a pole or bait. I was exposed to this technique called, we won't go there, bogging, where they actually walk in the tide, at low tide, and with their feet feel for different species, particularly crab, in the mud. And then you just pick it up with your toe and put it in your basket.
With your hand, not your toe.
Well, you touch. Oh, thank you.
Pick it up.
I'm still learning. But you feel around with it with your feet, and then you pick it up with your hand. So you're not using all these high-tech equipment. You're just
No
going
radar,
out there.
no bottom detectors.
Your feet is your radar. You know, you're going out there sort of feeling around and finding these crab in the mud and when they barrel down into the marshes, and then just scoop them up. So a lot of low-tech sort of ways of doing things. So I want to talk about a little bit about the traditional practices. So the cast netting, the bogging. The hand line was another technique that's used where you just attached a line and you put a little bit of bait at the end of the line and then you just dip it in water. So just really simple ways of attracting crab in particular. That's one of the bigger ones. And other things were just taking a pole, any sort of pole or stick, and then just going around at low tide, and also instead of the foot, is sort of flipping over crab and scooping them up. So a lot of ways that people just sort of walk into the creeks and streams and marshes and immediately gather a lot of the resources that are bountiful still. But that's becoming a little bit more of a challenge. And so the other thing that I want to talk about is sort of the gendered roles. Not women in particular, not men in particular, but looking at how the labor is divided. There is a symbiotic way that the men and women work together, but they have very different roles. And a lot of times it's presented as this homogeneous community or group, but they have different needs. So it's better to sort of separate it. So you'll know when you want to have these resource management strategies, what are the needs that we need to really address. And so when you look at what the women are doing, typically, and this is not absolute, I mean, I'm still researching, and there's lots of different variations. But they tend to work with the smaller cast nets. They are crabbing and getting smaller quantities. All of the items that they're out there getting, it's usually a smaller quantity, and it's more for immediate need within the household. They're looking for food. They're gathering food that can immediately be used within the home, are bartered to help with household needs. So this is not just specific to the Gullah Geechee. This is a finding, this is a pattern that is established in small-scale fisheries and fishing communities sort of worldwide, is that the women are using sort of these they're gathering smaller quantities, whereas, and doing more things onshore and inland, and not sort of out in the bay and in the open waters, versus men are doing sort of the larger quantity fishing, using the larger nets, the huge nets that are 6 feet or larger, going out in open waters, going on extended fishing trips. And so they're away. They could be away. It's like sort of going shrimping boats or fishing boats for extended times. And so that's sort of the differences in the fishing communities. And then they're gathering a lot of this to help supply, in terms of the Gullah Geechee men, and supply informal markets. Other ways would be to supply just sort of the official markets. In terms of sustainability, a lot of things that Quinn alluded to was sort of this notion of not overextending, over-exploiting the resources, only taking what you need. And so what theme came up a lot when I was talking to people and observing folks is that we really like to fish crab seasonally. Now, currently, the regulations allow crabbing to go year-round. Well, this is not a practice that the Gullah Geechee agree with. They prefer to do it seasonally and only a few months out of the year to allow the crab to regenerate. And that's the practice that they tend to follow. In terms of the oysters and restoration, what Queen Quet talked about is sort of this whole notion of returning the oyster shells back to the sea. That's a common practice. Many people mention that without being prompted. It was part of the natural progress of how they harvest oysters, and the second part of that was always to return the shells to the same creek beds and the same areas that they retrieved them from, to rebuild those colonies. So that was a common practice that's passed down generationally. And then they knew a lot about the different species and whether they had egg sacs and were reproducing. Those were immediately returned back to their areas because they understood that without those, they would not have anything to harvest. So this is sort of just sort of this common practice that was observed, and children knew it, and young adults knew it, and it was passed down from older generations. There's a multi-generational aspect of learning that happens there, and that is promoted and nurtured and able to happen in this small sort of environment. And then the other thing that I alluded to is sort of this technology. A lot of the boats that are used are called these bateaux boats, not bateau boats.
Battle, we said,
But they're sort of this dugout, flat bottom, low-tech boat that you kind of stir with a paddle and is not motorized. So that's one
wooden
thing.
boat with oars, no pedals. Roll.
I should have put a picture up there. But it's something that you just kind of are easily able to use in sort of the shallow waters and the creek beds. And the problem with that now, though, that is there's a lot of power boats in the area, so they're easily swamped. And so what that's causing is that a lot of the traditional users that use these bateaux are having to abandon them for power boats because they're constantly swamped. And so they can't continue to do the cast netting and the shrimping that they like to do because the power boats come in with these large waves. So that's something that we're trying to really look at and address. So what is quite different about sort of the culture on the Barrier Islands and the Sea Islands and St. Helena in particular is looking at sort of the livelihood strategies and these informal economies. You don't see this in your official analysis, financial analysis of what's happening in these informal networks. You're going to have non-traditional modes of production where you're having people barter seafood resources in exchange for other items. That happens quite frequently. Money is not the necessarily driving force in the community. If you are rich, if you have a good supply of seafood, then you have resources to exchange, and that happens. It's very common to see people exchange services for a bushel of oysters. And this practice happens quite unofficially. You'll see it at boat landings where people will drive up in trucks and just sell out of their trucks. Or people will come to docks and sell. It's not something that's being reflected in sort of the financial analysis. And what is also happening with this is that when groups of people go out, particularly the men when they go out and they fish and they bring in large quantities, they bring these back to their communities and redistribute them to people who are relying on them to go make these sort of informal catches. So it doesn't go through a formal market, but it's like having a local fishing person come in that has a supply, that readily has a supply that goes into this community resource. What also happens is women tend to fish, sometimes a lot of times in groups. I've noticed that they'll go, and this is our family groups, I've noticed like mothers, sisters, daughters will all go out together. They'll drive maybe 2 hours to get to a favorite fishing spot. They will fish till they fill up what they've told me is a number 2 tub. Number 2 or number 3 tub. And then they take this back to their home. And the distribution, the way this normally works, is the first distribution goes to the family. Second distribution goes to extended family members. The third distribution will go to community members. And so it's always distributed throughout the community. It's not just stored away for that one particular family. It's a resource that comes back to the family and the community as a whole. And so that's why I've put out sort of this communal distribution of resources, is that people rely on the ones who have the bateaus, who have the equipment, who can go out. So if you don't have that equipment, doesn't mean that you don't have access to the resources, because somebody's going to go out and do this and bring it back to the community, and they know who to call. Are the people who are actually doing the crabbing know who to call and say, well, we have crabbing now. And so that's the sort of transactions that are happening, that are actually sustaining a lot of people in the community that's not reflected in any sort of representation officially. It's an informal network that's really happening. And the other sort of the gender breakup of this is one of the crabbers on Defusky Island. He goes out quite a bit and catches crab daily. He brings his catch back to Defusky Island, and he redistributes it to all the women on the island. And the women on the island create devil's crab that they sell to residents on the island and tourists who come regularly to the docks to buy the devil's crab. So it's a selling process, transaction that is established that's not reflected anywhere until you sort of go out there and observe how this system is in place and people rely on it, and it's a regular system. But there's two regular crabbers on this small island that supply the entire island with the crab for the women to do these other informal transactions. And without these sales, these are the only sales that the women do with the devil's crab. This is their income. And so these are sort of these tourists can call and say, well, I'm having a party, can you supply, can you cater to all these crab? That happens on an informal basis. You're not going to find them in the yellow pages. You're not going to find, any advertising.
No websites.
No websites. It's a really informal process that occurs on a daily basis. And without the crabbers going out supplying these crabs, that system breaks down and collapses. So the other thing that I observed, and this is not just specific to the Sea Islands, it's more specific to fishing communities in general and the level of income, is that when you have access to these resources, your perception is that you're not poor. You do have a form of wealth because you have something to barter with. If you have fish, crab, shrimp, and other resources, you have something to barter with. So what researchers have found from the North America on into West Africa is that what women tend to do is the M and the W is men and women. So when the catches come in, 98% of the men would sell their fish versus 69% of the women. And of what they're selling, the men would sell like 71% of what they caught. And the women would only sell 30% because they tend to keep a lot of fish for household consumption and for bartering. And so the bartering was about the same, but retaining that resource in the household is what was important because that was more of a commodity that could be used. This is money. So it's looking at the resource as in a different light. It's viewed as income. It's used as something that can be bartered. It's not something that we can put in the bank, but it is something that within the community is seen as the bank because people know who have the resources and they know who they can barter with and they know what they can exchange it for. So if there's items such as meal, cornmeal, other staples that are needed, fish can be bartered in exchange for that. And that's a common practice. The common practice that's not safe. So what it's showing is that it's seen as quick cash that you can individually sell. And actually, a lot of the men in the sea islands, they're able to catch larger quantities, and they have the licenses through the DNR, and they're selling them to grocery stores such as the Piggly Wiggly. You know, the Piggly Wiggly relies on a lot of these local crabbers and fishing folks, so they're a vital part of the community. So I'm going to talk really quickly about some of the changes that are happening, because we're talking about sort of the space and access to the resources. So if you've ever had a chance to go to the Sea Islands and St. Helena in particular, you know how beautiful it is and how it's beginning to attract, or it has attracted since the 50s when the bridge came in, just scores of tourists. And so you have this paradox of plenty where people are coming in because we have all these wonderful shorelines and the beauty and the weather. But what that tends to do is it pushes people out of the traditional spaces that they're accustomed to gathering all these resources that they're relying on for these informal economies. So what you have now is you have quite a few people, and St. Helena in particular, which is census tract, well, this whole graph is St. Helena Island. But in one area of that census tract 12 of St. Helena Island, there is a 82% vacancy rate of units. So people aren't there. And what that means is these are vacation homes. These are homes that are rented for, are seasonally. It's just land that used to be used, this particular land, 12, used to be used for hunting. People relied on that to go hunting. But now it's a gated community, and they no longer have access to it. So they're not able to hunt or gather a lot of the fishing materials, resources that they're accustomed to bringing into sort of this informal economy. So they're lacking shoreline access.
I'm looking to see what you're looking at. There are no gated areas on St. Helena Island. So that section is suburbanized, but it's not technically gated.
Okay.
Off the island is.
So this area in particular has housing that has been bought by people who did not grow up on the island. These are new people who have come in. What you'll find now that you have larger population of non-native people that are coming in that have sort of outpaced the Gullah that were there. And so the proportions have changed. So I will clarify sort of this restriction. But even without the gated area, you have sort of this de facto area where people are able to sort of go. Because you have this polarization of newcomers coming in and people who have already been established and where they can be. And so with this new privatized land, you have to gain permission a lot of times to go in these areas. So you can't just go to the shoreline. You have to get permission from this new owner who's not there to use that shoreline to do your crabbing or your clamming. And that's a common practice. What happens is the new owner or whoever's managing the property decides who gets permission and who does not. If those folks are not in the area, then that just means you have no access, or your practices are criminalized because people tend to go over in those areas anyway. Very quickly. What is happening is, an example is that I didn't say the last bullet, imports is another concern. And the reason that the imports are another concern is because we're getting a lot of cheap imports from Asia that are being dumped on the market, and this is a common practice. What happens that makes the local shrimpers, the commercial shrimpers, become a little bit more aggressive in their shrimping techniques. And so what the top part of the picture is showing, which doesn't really show very well, is that you've just got everything in there. You've got the fish, you've got the shrimp, you got the crab, you have the turtles, you have everything. This takes away from what reaches the shoreline that goes into those informal economies, and so it takes away from that process. What you want to have is more of this clean catch right there at the bottom. So if those items, sort of the croaker and the other fish, is not reaching to the shoreline for these subsistence communities, then they don't have access to them anymore. And this is a common catch, the one at the top, with the commercial fleets. So that's affecting. So those challenges threaten the informal economies. And because these economies are informal, they don't have official recourse. There's not really a lot that can be done because there's not that direct communication with the regulatory agencies, because these are done informally. They are not regulated, or if they are regulated, they are not followed to the letter of the law. So Gullah Geechee people are actually conducting their practices as they've always done. Whether that is reflected and represented by the regulations, that's where the dialogue needs to happen, and that's not happening. So I would say the next steps, and I've changed around sort of the way that we looked at the conference theme, is I put communities first. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about environmental policy and management and strategies, is that we look at the physical environment and forget the people. And so what I want to focus, bring back to the forefront, is looking at what the communities are doing and how can we create these collaborations that values their knowledge. And we have an equal exchange of knowledge, not this hierarchical model where people are coming in and dictating what needs to be done in the community, but actually learning what's happening on the ground and what's happening sort of in Washington, and how those can be integrated to create sort of and restore our estuaries. So thanks so much for your time again.
And soon to be Dr. Fuller takes her seat. One of the things I wanted to clarify is the reason St. Helena Island, South Carolina does not have any gated areas on it is because several of us as the community members and the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition in particular that I founded fought to ensure that there was such a zoning law called the Cultural Protection Overlay District. That Cultural Protection Overlay District exists for St. Helena Island. A somewhat similar model is in the UDO plan in Charleston County, but not totally the way that we wanted it. They have something else that designates family things. But the Cultural Protection Overlay District does not allow golf courses, gated areas, or franchise-type businesses to be built on St. Helena Island. Okay. So that's why that is the case. And so there is this suburbanized area because it's split into tracts, and as she said, it's mostly absentee landowners because some, I call them destructionaires, y'all call them developers, had this vision of trying to make it a gated area when he first bought the land on speculation, but because of that law could not do it. And so, but what has happened, especially in that particular area that she pointed out, was people would still go there and harvest. So a man came out one day with a sledgehammer and busted up the entire oyster bed that had been there for who knows, probably 1,000 years. He busted the entire thing up into powder, all because he saw Gullah Geechees harvesting oysters there one day. So the week after he moved in, he did this and damaged the environment for everybody. And when DNR was notified, DNR said they couldn't actually do anything. Sheriff Department was notified. They couldn't actually do anything because they didn't see him on the oyster bed when they got there. My thing was, there's such a thing called CSI. Go in this house, get the mallet, check it. If there's oyster on it, take him to jail. But they don't do that. But the same things that she said in terms of restrictions that the community is dealing with, we get fined because we're in our bateau boat, in the creek, and a fish happened to be 1 inch too long. And people are getting fined $600 fines for one fish being over the count or the length, and then also the fish confiscated. That's why the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association, and many of you, if not everyone, should have gotten these, and just in case you didn't, I'm going to pass this around. Everybody can make sure to get one. The Gullah Geechee Seafood Festival is not only a fundraiser, but a community awareness event that the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association holds every 2 years, and that's one of the places where Sister Sharon got enlisted to serve food when she first came to St. Helena Island doing her research. So it's definitely an opportunity that the community has to engage with partners and collaborators of all kinds that want to help us continue our traditions and to make others aware that this is going on. It's been going on entirely too long. And the biggest argument that I know our Vice President, Ricky Wright, would want me to tell y'all right now is if he's going to get fined or anybody's going to get fined, at least don't confiscate their food. Because as you've seen outlined here, why should they have to deplete both their financial resources and the actual resources that they literally feed their families with? All because they had one fish too many according to the regulations that we had nothing to do with, or one fish too long. So this is a critical issue in terms of balance and definitely helping communities to be strengthened so that they can be better equipped to restore the ecosystem. So if the community wants to collaborate and work with folks, they don't want to have to do it in a hostile environment where they do feel like if you come in your uniform with any of your little embossed things embroidered on you that you're coming to give them a fine. So they don't want to talk to you. They want to get away from you. So you want to have them engaged where they know, well, no, we can all work together to cause this balance to happen.
Mm-hmm.